Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, Episode 7, Season 2. I remember maybe a year or so ago that Richard Perkins of Ridgedale Permaculture put up a video with this farm in England, and I just remember sitting sort of in awe of Oxton Organics for all 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 31 seconds of that video, and knew when we started the podcast that I would have to get this family on. Well, when I figured out how to do podcasts across the ocean, I guess. But today feels really exciting for me because I am joined by Jayne Arnold and Jake Eldridge of Oxton Organics, of that farm, which Jayne and her partner Julian started in the 1980s as an organic farm. They've been doing CSA sort of style boxes since the early 90s. Anyway, I'm joined by them to talk about their farm and their history, the farm practices, how they went kind of from a conventional organic farm to a no-till organic farm, or no-dig as they call it, and also being a family team. We talk a lot about that. This is just such a great conversation, and as always, I am super excited to share it with you. Also, I have a really cool announcement. This month, Joshua Satin of Satin Hill Farm is joining the No-Till Growers team to start helping us produce videos for the Patreon page. So if you go over to patreon.com/farmerjesse right now and sign up for like $2 or $5 or whatever you can afford, you can see some of these videos. We've got some from JM Fortier from my trip up in Quebec last month. Josh and my partner in No-Till Growers, Jackson, got some footage from Wild Hope Farm a couple weeks ago. They did some filming there. And so that's up there. There are so many more videos on deck to come by season 3. If we can really boost that Patreon account up, we would hope to have video to accompany every podcast episode. So the podcast is free. It'll always be free. We also add some videos for free up at No-Till Growers, the YouTube page of No-Till Growers. But for the super nerds, if you're willing to chip in a bit, we will have loads of additional footage, some additional audio. And one thing Josh and I are toying with is live Q&As with us and with guests. So join the Patreon page and really gain some added value there. Patreon.com/FarmerJesse. In fact, sorry, I'm going to keep going for a second, but in fact, the more we raise that number, the more we can add this season, like right now. So it's not just about season 3. With a little more money, we could be shooting at almost every farm by the spring and be adding value all summer while the podcast is in between seasons and I'm farming full time. Also, we'll link Josh's work in the show notes so you can check out his Instagram and amazing YouTube channel and his episode of the podcast from season 1 at Satin Hill Farm. And as always, at certain levels of patronage, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to JM Fortier, Tiffany Jackson, Yannick LaPlante. Don't let those dumpsters bully you, Yannick. You smile when you want to. Ryan Gosser, Suni Rodehofer, Carlos Rongel, Sean Sutton, and Marcus Neal. One of those cool cats simply upped his or her patronage. So if you just go from $2 to $5, I'll shout you out for that too. Thanks, you all. You rock. Anyway, enough from me. Let's dive right into this amazing interview, one that I hold very dear, with Jayne and Jake of Oxton Organics. Jayne Arnold, Jake Eldridge, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jesse. Thank you.
Yeah, it is great.
And it's so exciting to have you all on. This is going to be a lot of fun because this will be the first mother and son conversation I've got to have on the podcast. And I'm excited to sort of get this multi-generational perspective. So I thought we could start with you, Jayne. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of Oxton Organics and how it came about.
Yeah, certainly. We bought the land, we as myself and my partner, Julian Eldridge, we bought the land in 1986. And it was just a plain bare field, 5 acres. And we've always farmed it. We wanted to grow organically, so we've always grown organic veg. And over the years, you know, we were sort of conventional organic growers. So we ploughed the land every year and cultivated using a power harrow and grew green manures for fertility. And in the meantime, over the last 30 odd years, we raised a family, Jake being our youngest son, and have, you know, progressively changed from cultivating so much in the early years to try and rid ourselves of weeds like couch grass and the like, and found it, it just didn't work. We always had those same problems, but we managed to grow and grew quite successfully, and had a lovely little business, built a house, and the family, and yeah, up until about 3 years ago, when my partner was retiring, and Jake come back to the farm, and we decided to go no-till, which has been very successful for us, and amazing to see the change on the farm. And yeah.
Jake, what were you doing? Did you know growing up that you wanted to be a farmer? Were you working on other farms before you came back? What was that whole story?
No, quite. No, I had no idea. In fact, if I would have, if you would have told me that I was going to grow up to be a farmer, I would have laughed. I studied art at college, and I trained to be an illustrator, and started working in animation, like doing flash animation, after university, and then I quickly became quite kind of disillusioned by that whole industry, really, because I was working in advertising and marketing, and I didn't feel particularly nourished. And at that point in my life, I'd been in education for like all of my adult years, and I just wanted to travel. So that's what I did, and I traveled for a few years and met a lot of inspiring people, and learned some new skills, and it was that journey that kind of brought me back round to agriculture, from learning about kind of the kind of ecological crisis that's present at the moment. I kind of saw that agriculture could be something that I could have a quite potent change in. So and I kind of I came at it from a kind of permaculture perspective. I was living in a community in Spain where I learned about permaculture, and I kind of thought that my folks had some land that I could play with. so it was pretty much that. I decided to come back, and I reached out to my parents, and they were really supportive, and yeah, that's when I came back to the farm, and from there it's been quite a steep learning curve, learning about actual production agriculture, because I didn't have any, even though I grew up here, I didn't really have any knowledge of it. I had some experience actually working on the farm, but I never really had much understanding of the kind of techniques and principles behind it. So yeah, it's been quite a steep learning curve since then. But I've learned to value it more than anything. I came back here expecting to change a lot of what my parents had built. But coming back here, I realised that having a direct sales veg business is incredible, and to do it on such a small land base and be feeding families direct from a farm every week is a really incredible thing. So we've just kind of built on that since then, really, and I've brought in some kind of new techniques and ideas, and we've just tried to kind of optimize the whole process, really. Yeah.
That's so interesting. So okay, so maybe you could break down a little bit of what Oxen Organics looks like physically. So originally, I think Jayne said you all bought 5 acres. And then, is it still 5 acres? Is it all 5 acres or cultivation? Can you describe that a little bit?
No, it's we bought 5 acres, and then a couple of years later, some land came up to rent next door, and which is 7 acres. So we've got 12 acres all together. That's a lifetime rent with the council. So it's always felt quite safe. And we've built, when we bought it, there was no trees on the site. The hedges were very short and cut down, and now there's lots of lovely big trees, which is wonderful to see, trees that you've planted and are now tall and beautiful. We built a house, and we've got 6 polytunnels and a small glass house as well, and a prop unit now that Jake built last year.
Yeah, I'd just add that our gardens are only actually an acre. Our actual growing space now is quite small, and the rest of the farm is being put down to kind of habitat creation. So mostly at the moment it's mostly pasture. We have a small flock of sheep as well, and then we're introducing a lot more kind of perennial elements to that. So we're interested in agroforestry, and we're bringing a lot of trees into the wider farm. But yeah, the actual vegetable production now is very small, whereas it used to be a lot more extensive when when my folks were using tractors. It's kind of reduced from about 6 acres down to about 1 now.
Okay, so you described a little bit about direct marketing. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on how you're selling the vegetables? And I think, and it seems like it stems from way back. Can you talk a little bit about the history with that and then what it looks like now?
Yeah, we started a box scheme, which is a vegetable delivery service straight to the door locally in the early 90s, 1990, 1991 maybe. And that's, that we've sort of developed that over the years. We've never gone much past 100 customers because that is a comfortable amount for us with the infrastructure we've got. And since Jake's come back, he's I'll let Jake tell you about that, the wholesaling side.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, we've kind of the box scheme is pretty much at where it is, and a vegetable box scheme here it's from what I know of CSAs over in the States, Jesse, it's a similar kind of concept, but we don't actually sell shares in our season. We sell the vegetables week to week, and we deliver them door to door. So we have a delivery round, and all our veg boxes are within about 12 miles of the farm. I think a little further than that now. I think we might go 13, 14 miles, but it's very local. And now as well, like my folks had always done some wholesale, but it was kind of, as much as anything, it was to get rid of a surplus. They didn't often do kind of intentional plantings for wholesale, and that's something that I brought in a lot more. So it kind of, one of the things that occurred to me when we did the kind of redesign of the gardens is that we had to make them more manageable, and for me personally, to make them manageable, I had to decrease the size quite a lot because it's such a labor intensive process growing vegetables, and to do it well, I think it does take a lot of labor. So I wanted a smaller space, and to do that, I knew that there was perhaps a more select kind of group of crops that we wanted to grow more of because they worked well in more intensive systems. So what we kind of did is we've expanded the wholesale side of a business by planting more of the crops that are working well for wholesale. So a lot more kind of leafy greens and salads. Actually talking to our wholesalers at the start of the season and finding out, what they want to buy, agreeing rough prices throughout the season, and then actually putting it into our crop planning. So that, we're not wasting crops in the field by just planting a load of stuff and hoping we can sell it. We're actually trying to plan our sales week by week throughout the whole season, and then making a kind of a crop plan to meet those sales targets, and that's what we've done now with the wholesale, and it's been working fantastically actually. We've really grown the market for ourselves, and we've done it whilst reducing the space that we're using massively. And there's still a lot of work going into that, but we're now getting a better return on our labor as well. I think we are taking more time off, and this season especially has been quite, there's been rest as well as work, so that's been nice.
That's great. And who all is included in this wholesale? Is it just retailers? Is it restaurants? Is it
so we do restaurants, we do retailers, and we do distributors. So we have one big distributor who's our kind of biggest customer. Last year they accounted for about a quarter of our sales throughout the season. So they're a big customer for us. And then on top of that, this year we're doing a couple of fairly major restaurants, and then a few retailers on top of that. So it's quite a balance, and that works for us because the smaller the customers, if we have a lot of small customers, like the retail customers and our box scheme, that gives us quite a lot of resilience in terms of sales, because they're quite safe and we can afford to lose some. And then we have our bigger customers to really kind of shift some bulk, some bulk produce of the stuff which is really working for us, which is generally salads. To be honest, we sell a lot of salad leaves and lettuce and some cooking greens, a lot of kind of spinach and chard and stuff, and that kind of stuff we're selling in much bigger volumes, just because we have those big customers which can really kind of manage bigger quantities of that.
Okay, so can you describe a little bit more how that box scheme works? You said it wasn't quite the same as the CSA and that they're not getting a share exactly. Are the customers picking and choosing exactly what they want every week, or are there some things that are kind of, decided upon by you all, or how does that work?
Customers they have the option to sign up to a weekly box, and in the weekly box we pick what goes in the box. They can tell us what they don't like, but after that, we decide what goes in every week, and I try and make it a balanced box. But they also have the option to choose exactly what they want any week, and they can go to our website online and order a box, and that would automatically come instead of the weekly standard box. So we try to give the customers as much choice, to suit their lifestyles as possible. And it works. We've got customers who've been with us for 25 years or more now, which is wonderful. And their children are feeding their grandchildren on our veg now. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with the boxes, like when they're choosing, I kind of would like some detail on this, because I always think this is super interesting when people allow choice. How does that, how exactly are you managing that in terms of packing? Are there things that you're printing out, or?
Yes, we've got the orders. They place the order on the website, and I upload that onto a database, and the database does all the clever stuff and prints out sheets for each customer that's ordered. And then we have a sheet and pack to that list of what they've ordered, and pack their box to that list. Does that make sense?
I just like to interrupt and just say but the system that Jayne has built, Jayne and Julian, my folks, have built over the years to do this is very good, and it's something that's got for a business of this size, we're very small, and they've created a system which can handle bespoke orders online and print out. We get pick lists, and then we get packing slips, and it's really quite an amazing system for such a small business. And they did it totally off their own backs. They got our friends to help us out to design that whole system from scratch. And I'm not aware of many other small veg box schemes in the UK who are capable of doing that and managing that efficiently. So it's really to their credit that they managed to build a business like that. And there's a fair amount of kind of administrative work that goes with that, but it is quite a good system, and it does work quite well.
Yeah, I do think that I don't think it would ever have worked if it was with such a small business, if customers were able to choose exactly what they wanted. Because we wouldn't sell enough of the crops as they come into season. But having we have about 50% bespoke orders and about 50% standard boxes where we choose. And having the both definitely gives you the more flexibility that we need as a small business to be able to sell the veg that we've got ready in the field at the time. But the standard boxes are by far the easiest, and we love the standard boxes.
Yeah, is there like a limit on how many people can sign up for the bespoke boxes versus how many people can sign up for the boxes that you choose?
It's no, we haven't got a limit. It's sort of governed itself really. We've been quite lucky. There's about half the customers who just love having a box of veg that they don't know what on earth's come in, and they cook to that. And it's since the website orders built up, they've never been more than half of the orders, so it's always been manageable. I think if there were many more than half, we'd have to make changes and maybe manage that a bit, but we've never had to. And actually, the one thing that's made it work much better this year is I had tried selling whole foods and selling other people's products, and that was because we're so small. You were never selling enough. It didn't actually, if you look at the figures, make any money, and therefore we weren't selling much of our veg to customers who were ordering via the website. So it was one thing Jake looked at and said we should stop doing, and that has made the web orders now make a lot more sense because people have to buy our veg if they want to make an order. It's our veg, and so it works very well now.
So, are you all doing year-round sales, or is it just through the growing season?
It's just through the growing season. So we have about 12 weeks where we're not delivering, which tends to be in the spring.
Yeah, we've always done. If this is something we're actually thinking of playing with in the coming seasons, because previously what we've done is we've had a few months off in the spring, when what's known here as the hungry gap, when we have all our winter produce is finished, but our following season's produce hasn't really started yet, and we've always had a few months off. It's also when we're preparing for the coming season, so that tends to be kind of March, April, May. But it's that's since we've gone no dig, that's actually kind of changed a bit. We're having a lot more early crops. We're having a lot more early harvests in the polytunnels in our covered cropping, and because we're really kind of trying to push successions in the beds, we're getting a lot more early harvests, and because we haven't had a lot of because we haven't really had a market, because we've not been doing our veg boxes, we've been selling most of that wholesale in the spring to kind of help cash flow a little bit. But after analyzing our sales from these past seasons, we've realized that actually in the winter, the kind of percentage of our own produce that we're selling compared to stuff that we're buying in to supplement our veg boxes is actually fairly small. So we can actually do about the same. We can sell similar, if not more, produce in the springtime in the hungry gap, and actually take more time off in winter when there's very little work to do on the farm, so we can actually have a really good rest. So that's something that we're working towards. If we can manage that well, we can maybe take January, February off, and really so we can both really step away from the farm a bit more and kind of enjoy some other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, that's great. We have the hungry gap here as well. We don't call it that, but I like that more. We call it just March. But but yeah, it's great. That's a really interesting way of looking at it, that taking that break, trying to get that break in January and February instead of pushing it for when the veg is not really easy to grow. And then also, you could, if you have veg in that period, you can sell it really easily. So that's cool to hear that. Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to get a word from our show sponsor this week, Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers on the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Big thank you to Farmers Web. Check them out. Links in the show notes. All right, back to Oxton. So I want to hear a little bit about your sort of no-till style and kind of where, I guess it kind of starts with you, Jake. Where did you kind of get your inspiration for coming back and being no-till? I mean, you talked about the ecology, but like, were there specific people that were kind of inspiring you?
I mean, when I first came back to the farm, I was not interested in growing veg. I really wasn't. I was interested in like kind of perennial systems. Like I was really interested in like food forests, and that's something I wanted to implement here. It was actually after I came back that I got quite interested in market gardening through discovering people like Richard Perkins, John Martin Fortier, and a lot of the big names that we hear on your podcast. And it was. And also, I'd like to say that that Jayne especially was already quite interested in no dig when I did come back. That was something that she was already trying to implement. In our polytunnels, we were already in that transition of converting those to a no-till system. So the way that, like over here, that's generally called no dig, and it's quite specifically referring to mulch-based systems. So and using compost mulches as well, as opposed to like kind of raw materials like hay and straw. It's kind of pioneered by Charles Dowding, who I know you've had on the podcast, and who has been a great inspiration to us. So that was the system that we were trying to implement, really. And the real, the challenge for us was how to scale that to the size of our farm, really. Because on one level we were trying to reduce the size of the gardens, but on the other level, we're trying to scale up for real kind of small scale methods. So the kind of hybrid system that we've ended up with is it's a mulch based system. So we're using what's referred to as municipal green waste compost. It's kind of like the different counties have different waste facilities that they take, people's garden clippings and, all the kind of organic matter that people bring to the local tip, to the local rubbish dump, and they make compost out of it. And it's something that's quite cheap and readily available, and it's something that we've used to bring this system in. So it's not the best compost in the world, but it works. And we've got one of these facilities just down the road, so we kind of pay a guy with quite a large tractor to go with a trailer and bring 50 tons at once, and he dumps it on the farm, and then what we then do is that we have a system of permanent beds which are marked with kind of bed markers. We actually use pins in like a woven weed fabric around the edge of our blocks, and then we can just simply put out string lines to mark a wheeling, and then we use our tractors to drive over those wheelings with a with like a link box full of compost, which we then kind of rake off the back and rake out, and that means that we can move a lot of compost fairly efficiently. So we've actually been able to scale up that mulching process and do it in a way where we're not actually causing a great deal of compaction using the tractors. And because the beds that we brought in, we've never ploughed them, we've never done any soil disturbance, we haven't broad forked, and because before that they were in pasture, they were in like a long-term green manure. There was a lot of root structure there, so there's a lot of soil structure there, and I think that actually if we were to disturb that, then we would have a lot of more compaction problems, because soil, when it's firm but has a lot of structure, it has a lot of kind of root holes, it has a lot of worm holes, all those pathways, and that kind of open network of kind of tunnels that is created through all that action, through all that life, that's preserved. So that creates quite a resilient structure then. And we've seen actually using tractors almost, it's only a small tractor what we use, but we've not seen really any kind of signs of compaction from doing that. So it means that we can kind of, use some slightly heavier machinery than some other no-till growers use. So we use like these hydraulic link boxes for moving compost. We also use a flail mower collector for actually removing kind of crop residues. And that's really made it quite manageable for us, because the whole system is fairly the actual labor created by going to the no-till system has been like managed from using some fairly kind of slightly heavier machinery. But to be honest, at the same time, we're using the tractors a whole lot less than we ever did before. That side of things is actually very small. We might mulch like once a year, and we might bring the mower collector on once a year, but really most of the time we're just out there with hand tools, and that's really where all the work happens now is just with a kind of small collection of hand tools, and a bit of kind of sweat and thought. Really.
Yeah, can you describe that flail mower collector a little bit? Is it a bagged mower and it's on the tractor? Can you? Yeah.
So we got it. It's one of those things that we just had around because Jayne had actually thought about how we were going to get enough compost to create a kind of no-dig system, and she had thought about taking a cut of our green manures, and so she looked for something that she could do with that, and so I know, like most people listening, I imagine they're familiar with flail mowers, but this is like a larger flail mower than you have on say a BCS, and it's on a trailer pulled behind the tractor, and it has like a large hopper behind it that as the material is being macerated and kind of cut, it's all kind of flicked back into this big hopper. So you can, and because it's quite a large one on the trailer, we can actually pick up quite a lot of material at once, and then it's you can take it to your compost pile, and it has a kind of hydraulic lift which lifts and empties the hopper all at once. So what we're also doing sometimes is we're actually mixing some kind of more carbon heavy material into those crop residues as we collect them, so that we have a kind of pre-made compost mix. So what we generally do is we'll have some straw that we'll kind of have lying around, and as a crop's coming out, we're adding some straw to the beds, or sometimes we actually remove material and make it into like a windrow and add straw, and then kind of mow it all up into one mix, and then we'll add it to our compost piles. So it's kind of like it not only does it make the clearing a bit easier, it actually makes the composting quite a lot easier, and it makes quite a good quality compost because it's all made into quite kind of fine particles. So yeah, I think if you can Google that, like flail mower collector, and you'll see a few different versions, and you can actually get some smaller ones for smaller tractors which are mounted on the PTO. They're not a trailer based one, so they would kind of be more applicable to kind of smaller bed sizes, because our beds are 1 meter. I know you guys work in inches, so that's probably 40 inches, 42 or so inches. So we're using slightly bigger beds,
okay,
but that works for us, to be honest. And again, like going back to the kind of ideas around having kind of more resilient soil structure, like firmer soil, like our soil is quite firm. We, even though our beds might not be like totally ergonomic, we do sometimes like step on them and we don't see any issues. So like with all of those things, we're just looking at plant growth, and if plant growth is good, then we're not going to go crazy trying to like avoid stepping on our beds if our plants are growing fine. And this is something that Charles Dowding's talked about a lot as well. Soil has a structure, and if it's not totally loose, it's not always a bad thing. So yeah, I think I might have kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but
No, that's great. I love the idea of. I think that one of the things that holds people back from doing larger beds, and it's certainly been true for us when we were setting up our gardens, is the ability to step over them. But when you're working in a mildly even like a minimal tillage situation, that sort of compaction can of stepping on it can be an issue. So it's interesting to think about it. You can have wider beds in a potentially have wider beds in a no dig system if you're not having to worry as much about occasionally stepping on them. I think that's a cool point. Jayne, I'm curious in terms of, you kind of mentioned this earlier, and Jake said you were kind of leaning towards no dig anyway because of you were starting to transition your tunnels and that sort of thing. You mentioned earlier that there were some, you've noticed some differences. Can you kind of talk about what those differences are? Like, what are some things you've noticed?
Oh, yeah. The differences are huge, really. I think um, the biggest difference for me has been the weed control, and especially with perennial weeds. Is that I don't know if you know do you know what couch grass is?
Yeah, quackgrass. We have it
Yeah.
here.
So that was a major weed for us, which we tried all methods of trying to bring under control. And in a dry year, we could control it. In a wet year, it controlled us, and ruined crops. And it was a real difficult problem for us, the couch grass, when we were, cultivating. And the amazing thing for me was because just started bringing in one tunnel to see if I could do one tunnel of no dig. Um, I'd been looking into what Charles Dowden had been doing, and it looked like it would work to me, so I thought it was well worth giving a go. And the tunnel we brought in first had a lot of couch grass in it. And within one season, within the spring of not cultivating and just hoeing lightly, it was really weakened, and I managed to do in 1 year what we hadn't done in 30, and that's lovely. And the weeding is so much more pleasant as well, partly because you're getting somewhere. And the perennial weed gets weakened quite quickly. I think it's because it hasn't got that loose soil where the roots and the rhizomes can just run through and soaking up all the available nutrients that are available while the plants are still small. So the perennial weed gets so established so quickly after you've cultivated, and doesn't get that chance in no dig. So it's great. The lack of weed not lack of weed, the ability to control the weed. And hopefully within, a few years, I will be talking about, they're not being or hardly ever having to grow out weed and stuff. That's the goal. And it feels achievable. And it never did. It always felt like we would be battling the weed and battling nature, really. The other big change, having gone no dig, is by not using the tractor, by using a lot of hand tools and not having to wait for the tractor or wait for the right weather, because we can get on the beds, whenever, because the soil structure is so strong that if it rains, you can still go out the next morning and plant. It's really not a problem. And it's been able to, finish a crop one day and plant the next crop in the same ground the next. And we used to just grow one crop in each patch of ground, once a year, and it would be bare for the rest of the year. Or waiting, till it was ploughed again in the spring when the weeds would then get established. So, and the gardens they look nothing like they did before. It's so beautiful. Everything's full of veg almost all the time. It's wonderful.
That's great. I probably should have done this earlier, but can you all describe a little bit about your climate, just so we have a good idea of what your sort of frost-free days are, and then also kind of your general climate information?
So our kind of average last frost date is around mid-late April, and then our average first frost date is early mid-October. So we have quite a our season's not massive in terms of frost-free days, but we do have a lot. We have a very mild. We generally have very mild winters. We're in a kind of maritime climate, and also the area we're in particular does have quite a gentle climate. So because Britain's quite a small island, we're surrounded by sea. We're on the Gulf Stream, so we don't have these kind of heavy snowfalls in the winter. In fact, we very rarely have snow, especially these days. So we can grow year round, really. Like, we can have a lot of crops in the ground over winter. We obviously growth has slowed quite a lot, but yeah, and also where we are particularly is quite a kind of famous area for vegetable growing. We have, I don't know whether that's totally climatically or I don't know if that's totally about the climate, but also about the soils and the region. The region's kind of culture, but it seems like quite a kind place to vegetables, if you know what I mean. The whole landscape feels like it's meant for growing veg.
Yeah, that's great. That's got to be a fun place to farm. I sometimes feel like Kentucky it really hates that we grow vegetables, but
well, I suppose on average, we don't. Most winters nowadays, we don't seem to go down below -7 at any point. It's the day length that affects the winter growth so much here. In midwinter, it's sort of pretty dim by 4:30, and I don't know, sunrise is about 8 in the morning. So the day length, and the sun is so low as well. So I don't know. That affects growth quite a lot, as much as the cold, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Stuff just slows down tremendously here as well in the middle of the winter. So I kind of want to talk about a sort of bigger picture thing, is in terms of I'm a parent, and I think about that sort of second generation thing a lot. And I don't necessarily need my kids to become farmers, but I at least want them to consider it an option. Was there anything, Jayne, in terms of wanting somebody to take over? Were you hoping somebody would take over the farm? Is there anything that you were doing in particular to try and not turn farming off from them, or what were your thoughts on that?
I suppose in the early days, you kind of, you hope, you kind of like one of them to do something on the farm. But as it was, it always seemed to get more of a struggle, I think. So really, you kind of hope for, your kids to be able to make a bit more money than we were ever able to manage. So I didn't particularly want any of them to become veg growers, and none of them seemed to have an inclination, although they've always, they love the farm, and they love coming back and visiting. And I wouldn't have expected Jake to want to take up farming at all. And it was nice that he went away, and they all went away and did their own individual thing. I think to stay on the farm is probably quite difficult for the child and the parents. I would never have wanted that. But I wasn't desperate for any of them to join us on the farm, although by the time Jake decided to come back, with Julian had quite a bad injury, and I was sort of looking around, trying to work out how I could make a living on the farm without it being too stressful for Julian, seeing me working so hard and struggling to make a living. So when he did write and say what his proposal, what he wanted to do, he was living in Spain at the time, I was absolutely thrilled. It was wonderful. And it's been great, actually. we get on well. We have a good working relationship. And yeah, we've built a wonderful thing here, I think, since Jake's been back. It's lovely.
That's great. Yeah, that's great to hear. I feel like it's something that I have in the back of my mind of how do I make this attractive enough for our kids to come back, but like I said, not force them to, or not try and press it on them. And I guess there is that. You want them to kind of go away and have their own discoveries.
Yeah, I think that's probably really important for both sides, really. I'm very glad that's the way it worked here, for sure.
That's great. I mean, my kids are only 1 and 5 yet, so I don't need them to go away just yet. That would be terrible.
I mean, I'd like to just, if it's okay, I'd like to kind of add to what Jayne said there a little bit about, like, from my perspective, because as Jayne mentioned, like, there was never any pressure to take on the farm or to be part of the farm business. It's quite interesting that, like, me and my sister, and actually, in fact, I have 3 sisters, and they're all older than me, and 2 of them, have ended up working in kind of, one of them's an ecologist, and one of them's a plant scientist. So there's obviously some kind of influence from the farm in terms of what we were interested in. In terms of, like, just being interested in nature, really. And I think I had that, but I was always quite a creative child. I'm quite a creative person, and so, like, when I was growing up, that's what I thought I would do, because it's what I thought I was good at. Just art in general, or creative things. And it was, for me, I got really interested in farming when I realized that farming is, like, one of the most creative lifestyles you can have. When I actually got really excited about designing the farm, like, approaching farming very intentionally, and, like, with a design, essentially. And that's something we've kind of followed through on quite a lot. And also, for me personally, like, coming back to the farm and being confronted with, like, working with my family, which is, growing up with people, you're in quite conditioned relationships, and when you're an adult, you start to experience that, and you start to recognize what's kind of unhealthy about that sometimes. So like, I think for me, because of the places I'd been just prior to coming back to a farm, I'd actually been in, like, a Buddhist community where there was a lot of space for reflection and a lot of kind of emphasis on kind of, communicating in a more responsible way. It kind of, I feel like if I hadn't have been through those experiences, I would never have been able to work with my folks in such a kind of, I don't know, in such an easeful way. And it's not always easeful, don't get me wrong, like, there's sometimes tensions there, but generally, like, families can be really, I think they can be really strong in terms of working relationships, because there's so much kind of commitment there. There's so much solidarity there that, you can overcome some quite big kind of, differences in opinion, because like, you want to be together, you're really committed to each other, and I think that would maybe be a bit harder if it's just a colleague. Like, to have such a strong foundation of relationship has been really good, and it's it means that we're kind of quite forgiving of each other, I think, at times, and I know that Mum especially, like, has been quite, well, both my parents have been extremely supportive of me and have allowed me to kind of experiment, with my own ideas in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do anywhere else. And that's what's allowed us to make quite a kind of, radical transformation of this farm, is because they've been so supportive of me and my ideas. And yeah, so, thanks.
That's all right.
Hey, you all, one last interruption from me. The Frith event is sold out, but you can come kick it with us in San Diego and California in February. There are still tickets to the event we'll be doing there with Jared Smith of Jared's Real Food and our homie Stephen Cornett of Nature's Always Right. It will be super rad, all day, no-till intensive, with two people who are doing really amazing work. And towards the end, I'll do a little talk, bring some East Coast perspective, and then we'll probably all go out for a beer. So, more details on that event at no-tillgrowers.com under the events tab. Yeah, check that out. Back to the interview. So I want to talk, in 30 years of business, I'm sure that some things have gone well and some things have not gone as well. Does anything stand out for either of you as perhaps things that you tried that didn't go as well as you wanted them to?
I think you should start with this one, Jayne.
I'm trying to think. One thing that went well rather than didn't go well was last year was the first year we went down to entirely no dig, and it was the first year we had a little trial plot, and we had various problems then with trying to bring land in by blacking it out. We bought a woven mat to black out the ground rather than a plastic cover, and we put that down. We thought really well, and about a week later, 2 days later, we got a bit of a gale, and everything came off. And we were out there trying to tackle with these big sheets of black woven material that was shredding everywhere. That was a bit of a nightmare, and made me wonder whether it would work. And we also tried cardboard, not so successfully as well. But then when we got the silage tarps and put down on the ground, and that worked very well to black the ground out, and that the first year we went no dig last year was a very, very wet spring, and it was quite and then it went extremely dry in Northern Europe, and it was amazing. We have two very good friends who farm locally, both organic. And they had a terrible season because it was so wet after ploughing. And I could so remember other years where this had happened, where you'd ploughed and it had been very wet. You'd waited to plough, and then it dried enough for you to plough. And you ploughed, and then it never rained again for about 3 months. And the ploughing set like concrete, and it was just a nightmare trying to get plants planted and growing. And last spring, in our very first year of being no dig, we kind of sailed through because we didn't have any of that, any ploughing or anything. We just put the compost on. It kept the moisture in the ground. We have irrigation, so we were able to water. And so it wasn't something not going well for us, but we were helping our mates out that, were really struggling in those conditions. And that was just amazing to see with no dig that we could in conditions like that we were able to to plant and grow successfully. It was great, but that was something that went well and badly with my pecs blowing off. That was a learning curve. Covers down.
With that cardboard, was that the same issue that you were having it blow off as well?
Yes, yeah. We sort of stopped using cardboard, but I know other growers have used cardboard quite successfully. But I think on a large scale, you just can't get the cardboard. And yeah, we had a lot of trouble within the dry, it curling up at the edges, not making a good cover, blowing off, slugs. We had all sorts of problem with cardboard. We've totally given that up now. Yeah, we just use silage tarps, plastic silage covers, to bring our areas into no dig. We're not needing to use them at the moment, but we'll probably put a couple down over winter where we've got some, bare ground to make life easier.
Sure. Is there anything that comes to mind for you, Jake?
I would say the things that haven't worked for us, I think part of this whole redesign process for us has been about like really trying to minimize waste in terms of like wasted time and wasted crops. And one thing that we've done is tried to really take a much more planned approach to our seasons every year. And I think one thing that didn't work for us was going, planning too much. Last season we planned out every bed, every succession, and designed our crop plans around that, to really try and make the most out of the space. But as I'm sure you know, Jesse, and like any grower listening knows that like things don't go to plan all the time, and you're constantly adapting your plans and replanning. And so like when we'd planned all our successions in all our beds, as soon as one bed moved, we had to, change the whole plan. And, because we were also allowing an amount of time to turn the beds over, like I'd often leave 3 weeks behind a crop to make sure that bed was cleared and prepared for the next crop. And that meant that when you added all those 3 weeks up, but we were leaving a lot of the gardens empty for quite a lot of the season. So this year we scrapped that and we went over to a planning system, which is we basically do all the other elements of the crop plan other than that. So we start by we plan our sales, and then we plan a kind of planting calendar to meet those sales. And then we don't actually, apart from having a kind of a crop rotation, which we mainly have in our heads, and we might, we write down just as a reference, is apart from that, we don't actually plan any of our successions in our beds. And that just allows us to, when we've got crops waiting to go in and we've got crops waiting to be harvested, just to really see on week by week what needs to happen. And it actually becomes much less stressful, because you're not constantly trying to replan these quite elaborate plans. I mean, other people might have other planning mechanisms which are kind of more capable of dealing with that kind of detail, but for me it's just much easier just to see what needs to go in the ground and see what ground is free. And we do that within our rotation, but apart from that we don't have any constraints really, and that makes the garden very versatile. And that's where having a weed free no dig beds it comes into its own really, because the whole garden just becomes such a versatile space. As soon as one crop's finished, it's all it needs, however we clear that, whether we just kind of pull the plants out or whether we actually have to kind of undercut them and rake them up and get them out, or whether we kind of collecting them with a mower collector, all these different techniques. But essentially all that needs to happen is we need to get rid of the residues that are there, and then the bed either just needs a quick mulch or it's already ready to go, So it's kind of like, it just makes it simple. And it just means that we're not wasting a lot of crops in the field, because we're actually planning our sales. So like, to the best of our abilities, we try to figure out how much we're going to be able to sell of each crop throughout the season. And then we just plant to meet those sales really. And, we actually try to have a slightly smaller garden than we, need, because it actually gives us that kind of pressure to have, plants coming out of a propagation unit that, we need to find space for them. So it's like, okay, well, that crop's ready, like let's get it sold. And we'll kind of, it gives us that push to really make the most out of the space. And for us, like that really works, using a small garden, that really works, because otherwise, if we're not making the most of that space, then we've got to extensify and we've got to bring in more beds, and that just means that like the whole kind of overhead labor burden becomes much greater. So
Yeah, that's great. I think it's good that you touched on the crop planning thing. It's not something we talk about a lot on this podcast, and I think part of that is due to the fact that it's not the most exciting subject. But I think it's great because I think it's important, especially for younger growers, to hear this sort of this reality that like it's oftentimes if you plan a garden exactly as it's you're going to be sitting there with crops ready to go in the ground when the other crop hasn't come out yet. And that can be really frustrating. And we've definitely moved much closer to a crop planning system that's, we kind of watch our crop rotations, but mostly we're focused on what we need every week. So it goes from the beginning of the season, it's where the crops go, but by the middle of the season, it's what do we need to be starting that week to have it in 3 or 4 weeks.
Sure.
Or whenever it is, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And I think that's an interesting thing to talk about because it's not something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, but I think that crop planning obviously is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like it's probably one of the most important things that's made our recent kind of growth as a farm so effective is taking a more planned approach, and and really just minimizing waste, by kind of. And I think, again, like I'd emphasize that we plan our sales. We don't actually plan our crops so much. We plan to be able to sell a certain amount of each crop throughout the year. And like, if you think about that rather than just trying to fill a space, then you can really minimize on wasting your time and wasting your space, and wasting the soil fertility. And I think, like, especially if you're using a tillage-based system, I would say especially if you're growing a crop, if you're harming soil to grow a crop, you want to be selling it. It wants to be eaten by somebody. Otherwise, it's a real waste of something which is quite precious. So, like, we're trying to take care of our soils better, but, when we're actually using our soil, because I think most agriculture takes a cost on soil. Like especially quite extractive plants like vegetables, there's a cost to the soil there. So like if we're growing those crops, I want to be selling them, and I want people to be eating them. So that's where, I really do try to plan to make sure that the crops we're growing are going to be sold and going to be eaten.
Yeah. I must say that the crop planning, Jake's crop planning skills I think they've transformed the business. We planned our rotations, but beyond that, everything was in my head really, what I would sow and what we'd expect to grow. And it put a lot of pressure on, and it was very hard to pass jobs on. But with the planning that Jake does and the crop plan, and therefore the sowing plan, that you can have help and give it to somebody to go out and do the propagation. It takes a lot of stress off the growing for sure, and it really works. It works amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. I love how liberating it can be to have a good crop plan.
Oh yeah, it really is. It is, and take it from somebody who never used to have one. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I feel like this is part of the beauty of your sort of collaboration is that sometimes it's not maybe crop planning or marketing or something is not the specific skill set of somebody, and then it's nice to have to bring somebody in that maybe has that skill set so that you're able to, I always call it, like, this is what they call it in kitchens, like putting your aces in their places and being able to have somebody that brings it in a different perspective and is able to utilize it or do things differently on your farm.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I hope we have our aces in our places. But I think, like, for me personally, what I value about here and why I consider myself extremely lucky is because, not only have I got a farm that's already got a direct sales, business, it also has an a massive wealth of knowledge here. Like, Jayne and Julian, they studied horticulture and worked in organic horticulture for 30 years. So that's like, over 60 years of like collective experience, and that's saved me personally a lot of mistakes, being able to kind of refer to that knowledge and being able to question that and just being able to like have that safety net. But when I go to do something, Jayne or Julian they might have tried that before, and often they might foresee kind of a lot of problems, but I wouldn't be able to see. And sometimes I'll decide to do it anyway, or and vice versa. Sometimes Jayne would do things that I will perhaps not be so on board with, but that's the way it goes, and we support each other, and often I think one of the hardest things about working with anybody is actually taking a step back and kind of letting other people make the decisions and not being involved in them all the time, and that's something that we're probably still trying to totally balance. But I think with us, I do come from a much more design approach, and Jayne comes at it from kind of quite a kind of experiential and more spontaneous approach, and that kind of works. You might not expect it to work, but it does. We kind of balance each other out, and I think that's part of what the asset of this team really is that we're not just always going at things from the same direction. That we have different interests and different skills, and it works.
That's great. I guess I should ask this earlier. Is it just you two on the farm? And then I think you said earlier that Julian was doing. You told me maybe a while back that Julian was going to be doing deliveries while we were talking.
Yeah, it's mainly me and Jake, and Julian does the deliveries a day and a half a week, and helps with tractor repairs and things, but generally not the farming anymore. But we have been very, very lucky to have. It's one of the fantastic things actually about going no dig. We seem to have attracted some really enthusiastic young people that have brought a lot to the farm really. And this year we've been really lucky. We've had a couple that have stopped with us for the summer. They're about to go and lived here, and they've been helping us, and they've been great. And hopefully, it seems like they feel like they've had a wonderful experience and have learned a lot as well. And we also have a couple of other sort of young would-be growers, and they're just starting up their own place, and they come and for the experience really. So we have had other help this year, and
we have a
Sam works 2 days a week as well, started in the summer. So there's more people working here now than there were before, which is fantastic. The farm on less actual veg growing land is supporting more people and educating more people. And it's good. We need the help though.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. So I have kind of a new favorite question, and it's essentially, is there anything that you're super excited about changing for next year, or really dialing in for next year? And you both can kind of take that question individually if you want.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things I'm really excited about, and I think and you might get this from this interview already, but I am a bit of a kind of planning geek, and last year we did a lot of analysis of our sales, and we kind of really optimized the gardens this year. We're really growing a lot of stuff. Almost everything we grow gets sold in pretty large quantities sometimes. So I'm really excited just to carry that on really, and just really dial in our marketing really. So because to be able to see our packing shed and our veg store full of veg every week from a tiny garden is so satisfying, and to see all that getting sold, all of that veg getting eaten, it's super satisfying. So I'm really excited to carry on that process and get more detailed with more record keeping. We're implementing a new record keeping system next year using kind of bed code, actual crop codes instead of bed codes. So all our crops will be traceable from propagation all the way to harvest and to sales. So we can see exactly what is good. When you're kind of in the middle of a season, or you get to the end of your season and you're like, we had that one really, really good bed of lettuce or whatever it is. Like, what did we actually do? Why was that so much better? Like, to be able to trace those crops, and like, that's what I'm excited about, is making some kind of more detailed records that we can kind of keep refining this process. And also, we're actually starting to make a lot more of our homemade compost at the moment. Like, we're taking cuts. We actually planted some green manures last year with the idea of trying to kind of harvest that for compost. Like, in the long term, we want to be going over to using willows and actual, like, coppicing biomass from trees to make compost. But currently we don't have that. We're only planting these trees now, so we're kind of trying to make compost from just like whatever we've got around, and that's a lot of kind of green material from like just mowings from like our neighbors' nettles and things like that. And we're using the mower collector to collect that and make it into some like fairly big compost heaps. And actually, I think one of the restrictions we've had has been the quality of the compost we're using, because it is quite poor. And we've seen it in our polytunnels where we've been using our homemade compost, because it's like we don't have so much homemade compost, so we've only been able to use it on certain areas, and the polytunnels are always where we've got like a lot more production, so we kind of concentrate it there. But we see that the soil there in the polytunnels now is really, it's singing. It is just lovely to work with. It's so forgiving, and the crops quality and coming out of polytunnels is just superb. So like, I'm really excited to try and make better quality compost and use less of it in the gardens, and like see if we can really get like crop health at like that extra notch higher. That's something that excites me quite a lot.
And Jake, is there a specific program that you're using for that crop planning?
I just use spreadsheets. So like, this is something we did a training on the farm last weekend, and this is something that I think out of the things that we've developed here, something that's quite exciting is just the crop planning tools that we've developed, because they're really simple. They're just spreadsheets, and because they're actually fairly simple spreadsheets, but I kind of break it down into a few different processes by kind of actually planning our veg box menus throughout the season, and planning, like, allocating wholesale quantities throughout the season, and then just working back to make a propagation calendar. So it's actually quite a simple process, and it's only using spreadsheets. And it's like, but for us, I think that's really, really changed the game for us, and it's something that I'm looking forward to kind of sharing with people. Actually, something that I want to develop into like perhaps an online crop planning kind of package. But yeah, so watch this space for that.
Yeah, let us know when that happens. We'll definitely point people in your direction. And then Jayne, is there anything that you're super excited about for next year?
I'm excited to see how much more the soil improves. The improvements and the lack of weed in 1 year has been great. So I'm really excited to see what happens outside next year on the soil. And also this, we touched on it earlier, where we've planned into the crop plan to try and we'll be stopping delivering at the end of January rather than trying to go on to the end of February or March, and having a month off in February where there's not much else going on the farm, and being able to go away and have some time, completely off the farm. I'm quite excited about that. But also the challenge of trying to get lovely fresh veg on people's doorsteps by about the middle of April. I'm quite looking forward to that challenge as well.
Well, Jayne and Jake, thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks, man. And I really appreciate the podcast. Like, I listen to it a lot on the farm, and I think it's a fantastic resource. So yeah, thanks, and keep up the good work.
All right. How amazing was that interview? Got to be honest, as a parent, it tugged on the heartstrings a little bit just hearing how excited Jayne was to have her son back home and farming with her. Anyway, check out Oxton Organics on Instagram and Facebook. We'll hook it up with the links in the show notes. Are you subscribed to this podcast wherever you're getting it? You should do that. That gives us bragging rights at podcast conventions. Also, in unrelated news, are there such things as podcast conventions? I honestly have no idea. I'm just always looking for a place to go flex. Also, now that the episode is over, consider going over to the Patreon page and signing up. $2 a month, $5, whatever you can afford. You rock. Patreon.com/FarmerJesse. Go check out some of those videos. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Do we get a theme tune?
No, you don't. Unfortunately, that comes later. It's funny. It's everybody wants that this year. And I was like, I hate disappointing people, but I do all the intro and stuff later. I should do it, though.
No, I love it, man. I was thinking of learning it on the harmonica because I play the harmonica a little bit. So yeah,
that would be so awesome. I thought about having like a contest where people could like send in their versions of the theme song, and I would play them in the beginning because so many people complain about it because it's so ridiculous. But it's like a point of pride for me.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, that's great.